Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of CLOL Office Hours. This is a new show run by me, Grapes, covering all things to know about college League of Legends here on Salty Runback. If you're watching this on our public platforms, it is very good to see you. This first episode is free for all. However, this is typically going to be a Patreon exclusive show with the extra salt tier of $5 a month on our Patreon going to give you access to this show, which we'll be releasing every Friday. So make sure to head down to the link below if you are watching this on YouTube, patreon.com/saltyrunbackna. That will get you access to every episode of this show moving forward for just $5 a month. But we wanted to release this first episode to the public just so we could get everybody on the same page and make sure that if you do want to try to support us, you know what exactly you are dealing with and what you're going to be expecting in terms of content on the Patreon. So this is a new show, as I said before. This will be going into all the nitty-gritty of all things CLOL for the entire 25 season. And when we say nitty-gritty, we definitely mean nitty-gritty. I don't think anyone has ever done a show like this that covers the entire collegiate landscape from the start of the year, which is like the start of the regular season, all the way into the championship bracket. That is what this show is going to hope to accomplish. I kind of envisioned this as being sort of a homage to JLXP, show where Jat goes on, kind of just talks in front of a camera for a little bit about whatever he has on his mind in terms of the LCS. And so that is the goal of this show, although just for CLOL. So we got some specific fun activities planned here. We're first going to break down exactly all there is to know about CLOL, just the format and everything like that in case you are just getting into it for the first time. And then we are going to do a power rankings of all of the regional conferences and try to determine which conference will be the most competitive, which conference is the strongest in the collegiate landscape. So in case you are super unfamiliar with CLOL and don't know too much, well, lucky for you, the format has changed for all of us going into the 2025 season, thanks to some of our good friends at GG Tech. This is a quick look at the format comparison from last season, which was 2024, to this season, 2025. The big differences, of course, here are that there is a much shorter regular season. It'll be 5 weeks long instead of 7. Instead of a group stage in the regular season, it will be a Swiss bracket for all of the regional conferences. That is North, South, East, and West. Partner conferences, regular season, and playoffs kind of operate on their own independently, and so these specific format changes are specifically for the regional conferences. But it works very similar to if you are familiar with the NACL qualifiers or even Worlds, very similar to something like that, where 32 teams come into this conference. They play a Swiss bracket where they play teams of the same record as them. 3 wins means that you are into the playoffs, and 3 losses mean you are out. Once you get to once you already get to that 3 wins, you still continue to play for seeding, because once we get to the regional playoffs over here, it is a modified double elimination bracket in comparison to in 2024, where there was a single elim bracket and then a consolation bracket as soon as you got eliminated in the quarterfinals. So it'll be a longer regional playoffs, which I think is fun because it means that there's going to be longer competition between the top teams and kind of weeding out some of the teams that maybe were struggling a little bit more. And it means that there's a modified double elim bracket. That means that the top 8 seeds in the upper bracket will be the teams that finish 5-0, 4-1, and then a couple of the 3-2 teams. I don't know exactly what the process will be in terms of trying to figure out which of those 3-2 teams get into the upper bracket, whereas the rest of the 3-2 teams will go down into the lower bracket and have automatic spots in single elimination. That is just 1 loss and you are out. The double elimination continues into the national championship bracket. There will still be 32 teams. Last year, GG Tech made a bit of a change where there was full double elimination for top 8. However, it was just single elimination for rounds of 32 and 16. Once again, we are moving to that modified double elimination bracket where the top 16 teams will immediately place themselves into the upper bracket and the bottom 16 teams will be placed into the lower bracket. The teams will be seeded by a selection committee. Speaking of those rules, it will be a mandatory it will be mandatory, I should say, that the top 2 teams, the finalists in each of the regional conferences, guarantee themselves a spot in the upper bracket. So that is the benefit of performing well in your regional playoffs. Not only do you prove yourself in some way, but also if you make it to the finals, you get an automatic spot in double elimination. There's nothing the committee can do about that to change any of that. The prize pool has been shrunk a little bit, but that's just because Riot, I think, is pulling out a little bit more this year compared to last. And we have no real word on what land structure will be for grand finals, as well as what a broadcast will look like just yet for the national championships. Obviously, that was a big topic of conversation last year, as you can see, repping the Boise State jersey here, as I was in Idaho for the national championship finals. But again, only finals were broadcasted last year. We're hoping that next year something changes a little bit. So, let's get into the main topic at hand today. There are 13 collegiate conferences that will be competing in the CLOL season for 2025. And if you are familiar with a sport like college football, for instance, you might recognize some of the similarities that you have here. In college football, you have the Power Five, which are like the 5 biggest conferences with the most competitive teams, and then you have all these partner conferences that are surrounding them. And the way that the playoff was determined is like, you take the champions of each of the big conferences, and then maybe a couple of them from the smaller conferences. It works a little bit differently in this scenario, but in terms of the big conferences and then the partner conferences, that is still definitely the case here. You have your North, East, South, and West in terms of regionals, and then you have all of these other conferences called partner conferences. Now, these operate a little bit more independently from GGTech and Riot. They can sometimes run their own lands. They have their own structure of regular season, but the big thing is that if you have at least 8 teams in your conference, you are guaranteed a spot in the national championship bracket for the winner of your conference. So, if you win the Peach Belt, if you win the WHAC, if you win the NJCAA, if you win the NECC, etc., you guarantee yourself a spot in champs, whereas things look a little bit differently for the partner conferences, which we will talk about right now, because one of the biggest changes that they made going into the season in terms not just of format, but in terms of qualification processes to get into the national championships was this. This is a change to the rulebook that wasn't necessarily disclosed. I mean, this rulebook is available to the public, but they did not necessarily make a full announcement. GTech did in regards to this. So I thought it was an important thing to kind of share with you guys and talk about because it is a very big change. What used to be the case was automatic bids to the national championship, to that 32-team bracket, were determined by a number of factors, but most notably by the results of the best teams in each of those respective conferences over the last 2 years. For example, in 2024, you can see here that the South Conference ended up having the most auto berths into the national championship bracket because UST won the Natty in both 2022 and 2023. That gave them the most points. North came just behind because Maryville and SLU, or Maryville and ISU, or whoever it was, ended up doing very well. And so they generated enough points to be second, etc., etc. And these were the determiners in terms of figuring out how many teams each conference sent to the national championship automatically. Now, the committee was still able to vote in 7 teams last year, and they could have been from any conference. For example, the West, because they only placed 5th in terms of conference ranking points, only got 1 automatic berth into the championship bracket. However, we ended up voting, I think, 3 or 4 more teams into the bracket afterwards because the committee personally thought that teams like UCI, UC San Diego, Colorado Boulder, USC, those are the 4 other teams that got voted in. The committee thought that those teams were still deemed eligible and worthy, and so even though only 1 auto bid was given for the West, they ended up getting 5. Now here's a change that is very big from this previous system to what is going to be the case going into 2025. All of a sudden, things look a little bit more rigid and structured, which I definitely understand GGTech / Riot / whoever it was in charge of this wanting to do. Because this system on the left, definitely very confusing in terms of finding results from the years past, not necessarily always a guarantee of what the results currently look like. And so what they decided to do was to grant automatically 4 auto bids to each conference in terms of regional conferences, I should say, and then only 1 spot per partner conference automatically. Now, the big team that this hurts is the NECC in terms of the fact that they were actually the 3rd best performing conference over the last 2 years going into 2024, with teams like Fisher and Winthrop performing very well for them. And with this change, NECC will now only get 1 automatic berth, and that'll become big as we get into our power rankings later on. The other change that was made is that for the selection committee, they now get 8 total vote-ins instead of 7. However, the committee is only going to be allowed to vote for one team additionally per regional conference. That means that the North, East, South, and West can only have a maximum of 5 teams participating in the national championship bracket. Now, I don't remember necessarily how many teams ended up in each bracket. I think East might have led the charge with 5 or 6. But regardless, I'm not the biggest fan of this change specifically. The partner conferences can get voted in a max of 3. That way, 4 teams per partner conference could theoretically get voted in by the committee if they were deemed eligible, but only a max of 5 for the regional conferences. And personally, I don't necessarily love this change, specifically because the conferences aren't super balanced. You could see a world where the 6th best team in the North Conference, for instance, is way better than the 2nd or 3rd best team in the West Conference or the South Conference. And so under those rules, the 6th place Northern Conference team not going to get allowed in just because they are playing in the stronger conference. And we'll see how much this ends up actually impacting things. My gut reaction is this actually isn't going to change much, but I do wish that the committee had a little bit more flexibility in terms of getting to determine who exactly gets into the national championship bracket. Because I think at the end of the day, while it is good to reward things like conference champions, which this format still obviously is doing, I think it also is important for the committee to try to pick the best possible teams to go into the national championship bracket, the teams that have potentially the best shot at lifting up that trophy at the end of the year. Again, not the biggest deal in the world. We should move on because we've already been yapping for a while. Regardless, we're going to be talking about the strengths of each of these conferences and power ranking them bottom to top. Now, that is going to be the main point of this episode of CLOL Office Hours. But the other thing that we're going to do within each conference is we're going to rank the teams within them. We're going to try to figure out who's the most likely teams in each conference to win the conference, take home that automatic berth, and be in the national championship bracket. For the regional conferences, which have 32 teams, that's North, South, East, and West, again, I'll be ranking the top 10. As for the partner conferences, because there's not as many teams in each of them, I'm just going to rank kind of as many as I feel like. How are we going to be ranking these teams? Well, the first category that I was going to use is how strong the top of your conference is. How many teams in your conference are championship contenders? How many teams could realistically reach the top 8, etc. The other, of course, is how deep your conference is. So how many teams could make the top 32 out of all of the teams in your conference? And then I also crunched some numbers and found the average ELO of the top 16 and the top 32 teams in each conference for the regionals, and also just took a look at how many teams have 5+ diamond average players when looking at the snapshot that was used to determine seeding. And of course, the final is vibes. As you can see, my good friend Ego from Blue Lock loves to say that his arbitrary decision making also takes a factor in terms of determining his rankings. And so that is what I'm going to do here as well. If you disagree with anything that I have in here, make sure to leave a comment below because I would love to hear what your thoughts are. However, don't take it too seriously. Again, we are just in the preseason, so we really don't know too much. I'm kind of going based off of previous year's success and solo queue rank to determine a lot of my rankings here. So let's kick things off. We're going to go bottom to top, and unfortunately, starting at the bottom is the Big East. They are so down low on this list that they actually are not even eligible for qualifying into the championship bracket. Unfortunately, you need 8 teams to make it into the champion equals auto qualify category, and Big East only is running with 6 teams this year, just like they were last year. Best of luck to all the teams in there. Butler won the conference a couple years ago and were represented in the championship bracket, I think in 2022. And Villanova currently has the highest ELO team out of the teams in the Big East. I'm expecting them to win. Don't know too much about them. The Big East is... It's nice to have these legacy conferences kind of in CLOL. They're a very good basketball conference, as both of these teams have historically good basketball programs. However, not going to be good enough to make it into CLOL. Let's move on to our 12th best conference in the CLOL ecosystem. This is going to be the NJCAA, the National Junior College Athletics Association of Esports. This is basically the junior college / community college circuit. this is the home of one of our favorites on the show, Salty Runback, Myra Davis, who has taken a new position at Kiana. We wish her and the team the best of luck this season. However, this, I think, has historically, over the last couple of years, become known and maybe infamously as like the weakest conference that sends the teams to champs. St. Clair College, which you probably are familiar with if you're watching this show, was in this conference until last season, where they eventually moved to East. When they were in this conference, it was a one-team conference with St. Clair winning it all. And now it's close to a no-team conference, unfortunately. These are the teams that I thought maybe have a chance of winning. We got Keanu here. I don't know too much about that, but I know Myra's there, and Myra does some pretty cool shit. So that's why I basically have her here. Wake Tech and DuPage are the two teams that made it to the finals of last year's NJCAA championship. The tournament was won by Wake Tech, who immediately went in and was seeded by Maryville University in the first round, immediately knocked out. No surprises there. The number one team in this conference is probably going to be Northern Virginia Community College, aka Nova. They have basically a full diamond team. They're the only ones that do in this conference. So nothing too special. However, I am expecting by the end of this season, Nova to be making it into the top 32 and probably getting eliminated pretty shortly after that, unfortunately. We'll continue on to number 11, and this is where we're going to start to get into some of the real dogs. We got Peach Belt coming in at the 11th best conference. The pros for this team, or for this conference, I should say, is that they have a top 16 level team, I would argue, in Converse. The bad part about it is Converse is basically the only team in this conference. Outside of Kennesaw State, which I have ranked here at number 2, everybody else is like a plat, emerald, maybe even gold average roster in the Peach Belt. And so Converse, which we can talk about them really quickly, they are definitely going to win this conference, and that is going to be the case. And then we'll see what they look like either in the OQs in the spring split or potentially in the championship bracket once they get there. I want to shout out Florida Southern College because they were historically a team that was able to compete with Converse quite often. They had Dragowski on that team for quite a few years. However, this year they have some of their own players, old players like Dreddo and Doricon, but the rest of their roster I don't think is going to cut it. Kennesaw State is like a diamond average roster. And now we could talk about Converse for a little bit. This team have some big changes from last season where they did finish, I believe, in the top 32. After playing a very close series to Northwood University in that first round, who eventually finished top 4. So you can make your argument right now about whether Converse was underseeded. I actually had them a little bit higher than where they ended up being. But regardless, they have the best player on their roster from last year returning in Devin. They also add one of Devin's favorite bot lane partners in Phantom Star. These guys played together in a lot of the amateur tournaments throughout the course of 2024. Zav has moved up to the jungle position from just being a coach. He's always there. He's gonna do his best. And then the last two pieces to this Converse roster are the solo laners, and they are going to be the brothers of Ego and Pain Shell. These guys played on Harrisburg last season. Unfortunately, I believe the Harrisburg League of Legends program has kind of dissolved at this point. They are not running a roster in CLOL this year. So Ego and Pain Shell decided to come on down to Converse, where I thought Ego was actually around the top 10-ish list of top laners in CLOL. I wonder if he makes that cut this time around because there are some new players coming in. But overall, I think that Converse is going to win this conference pretty handily. We'll hear more about where I believe they rank in the general national standings in a little bit. Top 10. We're going to go with the WHAC, the Wolverine Hoosier Athletic Conference. This is an interesting one to me because this is the conference that Aquinas was in for the last couple of years. You might remember them. Teams play with players like Stevenator, who were pretty perennial favorites to make it into the top 32 bracket every year. Unfortunately, it looks like Aquinas is not competing in the WHAC this year, and so we will have somebody new potentially entering the fray. The reason that I have the WHAC higher than the Peach Belt, despite them not having a high-level team like Converse, is that they are much more deep. They have way more competitive teams, and I think the pros and cons here are listed here. While they don't have a top 25 team, I don't really think there's a favorite to run away with it here in the WHAC either. So it could be any of these three teams that I power ranked. that could be representing the WHAC once we get to the championship bracket. It could also be somebody else. We just have to wait and see. We're going to start off with Indiana Tech. They are an Emerald team on average, but they do have a master level top laner named Bandit Boy. These guys finished 3rd, 4th last season, dropping in the semifinals. I have them power ranked at 3rd in the WHAC so far. Rochester Christian I've gotten at number 2. They didn't do too good last year in the conference, but they do retain some pretty solid players. They also have brought in a challenger top laner named Ember. I don't know too much about him specifically. I hope to learn more. If you are somebody from Rochester, please let me know what you think about your team. The rest of the team kind of remaining similar. And then number 1, we have Siena Heights, who is a team that lost to Aquinas in the WHAC finals in 2024. They retain a good chunk of their team. They got 5 master tier players, which is not something that a lot of the other rosters in this conference could say. And they should be actually a pretty decent team. While I do have them as the favorites, I do think that Rochester Christian and Indiana Tech can potentially contest them with some of the interesting roster choices that they have. More specifically, Rochester, I think. Siena Heights, I think going in is the Vegas favorites, if you want to put it that way. And so I have them ranked here as the number 1 team in the WHAC. As we crack into the top 9, we're going to go over to the Mountain West Conference, which is another conference that has a lot of overlap with traditional sports. My Boise State jersey might remind some of you of the Mountain West because they are a team that competed in the Mountain West in football, and they are also a team that are competing in the Mountain West Conference in CLOL. Shout out to Kelsey Moser. I know right now the team is basically just a club team with not a ton of expectations, but they still are here in the Mountain West. I think it's always very cool to see some legitimacy being thrown that way in terms of sports conferences carrying over into esports. This conference definitely is, I think, a bit of a step above some of the other ones. They expanded this year from 8 teams to 14. They have more teams that are kind of diamond average. However, there is one big clear favorite at the top in San Jose State. We'll go through our power rankings really quick. Nevada and San Diego State, both were teams that made the semifinals last season. Both are about a diamond average roster. They have a chance to maybe crack up into higher spots, but not going to put them behind these next 2 teams. Number 3, I have Hawaii. These guys finished runners-up last year in the conference and have a good chunk of their players back. And at UNLV has the number 2 slot. They are the highest team, actually, out of all these guys in terms of ELO. They got a full roster of Diamond Plus players, which is a very cool thing. And at number 1, I think is the favorite for this, San Jose State, to defend their title in the Mountain West. They won the conference last year, led by Evan Lai and Went Rumble in the mid-jungle. They have a couple of their other players still sticking around, but that mid-jungle is certainly the core. You might know Evan Lai from teams like Nigel's Last Tiles in the NACL Open qualifiers. Went Rumble, a famous streamer. Very good at Rumble, also very good at other things like Veigar in the mid lane. He can definitely pack a punch. While I do think the competition in the Mountain West is a little bit better than some of the other partner conferences that we've discussed, I definitely think that San Jose State is still the runaway favorite to win this just because of those 2 in there. Hawaii, of course, was the finalist last season, and they did not provide much of a fight. The ECAC, the Eastern College Athletic Conference, these feature a lot of teams, I should say, kind of on the East Coast, or I guess some in the Midwest area, I guess, as well. There are some teams coming in, teams coming out. The cool thing about this conference is on over half of their teams, I think it's 8 out of 14, there is a Masters Plus player on them. So I think that is very cool. It shows that, there's at least a shooter on a lot of the teams, regardless of who their teammates are. They should at least have a good time trying to carry some of those guys. Let's start at number 5 in George Washington University. These guys made the playoffs last season. Don't know too much about their roster, but they retain a lot of their players and are pretty high in ELO. So I have them here at 5. Number 4, SUNY Binghamton. They have 3 Masters players. This is a new team to the conference. I'm excited to see how SUNY Binghamton do. And I think the big change here is number 3, going to be Purdue. Purdue University historically has been competing in the North Conference. They finished top 8 in North last season, I believe. A lot of these guys play on OQ teams called the Nuke Hunters. Most notably, their support, I believe, named Saknam, is kind of their big captain or leader, things like that. I think some of the pieces around him have kind of shifted around. However, Purdue historically has been a very good esports organization. There was a time where they finished top 16 in the championship bracket, and while that's not necessarily the time now, I still think that Purdue will be a threat to potentially make it their way towards the top of the ECAC. Number 2, I got RPI. This is a team that won the conference in 2023. They are led by their bot laner Exithy. He was the ADC on Reluminate in the OQs last season, and he is listed on their roster sheet, so he will be playing in the collegiate scene this year, even though he didn't in 2024. The rest of the team is about diamond average. So you had a diamond average team and like a solid 80 carry player who's been on OQ teams, or a solid carry player that's been on OQ teams. I feel like that's a good recipe for success in partner conferences, or at least to get a team into the top 32. We saw Levitate do that with USC last season. I feel like RPI, Exithy has a good chance to try to make a name for himself on this team, to try to carry this team into the top 32. But at number 1, I've gotten Brooklyn College. This team is the highest ranked in the ECAC by ELO, and they have 2 other master players as well as a new guy named Nerfing. He's a challenger player. Don't know too much about him unless this is a new IGN that is just a name change that I'm not super familiar with. But yeah, I'm excited to see what Brooklyn College does do. I think they made the playoffs last season but didn't win. This ECAC conference is seeing a lot of the teams that were in this conference leave, like Illinois Wesleyan, Campbellsville, and Columbia College. They are all gone and part of different conferences. So it's a new age for the ECAC, and I have Brooklyn College as the favorites with RPI not too far behind. The 7th best conference in CLOL this season. We're going to really start getting into these heavy hitters now. We're going to go with the Esports Collegiate Conference, the ESC. This is a historically good conference. They have had really fun names like Buffalo, who made top 8, I think, in 2021. Ball State has been around for a while. Northeastern's been around for a while. A lot of really fun names in the ESC. And they are always historically good. They always have a lot of really solid teams kind of just throughout. And they have a pretty unique schedule, actually, where they play like twice a week. So they play a lot of League of Legends compared to some of the other conferences in here. So we're going to once again do a top 5 here for the ESC. Starting at number 5, I got Kent State. This team has got a support named Alcalamity, who played on Gravity in the OQs this past summer. That was the second Gravity iteration, not the first one with Applause and Onat and some of those guys. Alcalamity has gotten a good amount of a good amount of support from analysts around the space, and so a lot of people think that he is a really big unsung prospect. I personally have not seen a ton of tape of him, but excited to see what he is going to be cooking here at Kent State. His ADC in that OQ, his name is Voidstar. He competed in the Kent State team last season. However, I'm not sure if he is back. If he is back, maybe I rank them a little bit higher. At number 5, we have Western Michigan, who have 2 players in Challenger GM named Mechi and Piftic. However, I can't rank them too much higher just because despite them having a lot of high elo players, they did miss the playoffs last season. And so that just goes to show how competitive the ESC really is. At number 3, I've gotten Buffalo. They won the conference back in 2022, as I mentioned, and went on a big run to top 8. They don't have a lot of the team of the same players from that iteration. However, the Buffalo team also finished top 2 in the ESC last season. So they are bringing, I should say, some of those players back to the team in 2025. Now we get to the top 2. I really flip-flop between these guys for so long. As I said, in here it's a 2-horse race, but the question is how good are the horses? At number 2, I've gotten Ball State. This might be a bit of a surprise, but Ball State, who were the champions last season, I'm going to have them a little bit lower this time around. This team always is very good. They have a very deep roster. They always rotate around players. I think last year they had like a 10-man roster. Remy, who is the partner of one of our good friends here at Seltzer Run by Camcom, also beat me in Caster Clash in the mid lane role earlier a couple months ago. So got that on the top of my mind, Remy. Ball State, very solid team. It just depends on what roster they end up rolling out, if they can find that group of 5 that clicks. But the number 1 team I have here in the ESC is actually a bit of a throwback. It's Northeastern. This is a team that also did very well in the ESC a couple years ago. but have maybe struggled over the last couple of seasons. However, they are bouncing back really nicely. They have 4 players that are Diamond 1 or higher, according to the recent snapshot, and 2 of them you might know if you've been following the amateur space. The first one is Hiccup, the support for Ducky Getters last season, and a really solid Enchanter player. She is now the support for this team. I don't believe she was on the team last season. And the top laner for this team is Jisung, who, if you might not remember Jisung, you might remember a player called Dot, who competed in the amateur spaces back in 2022, 2023. Was on teams like 300 and some other ones throughout his pretty short career. However, I think when he was playing in OQs, he was actually a very solid player on things like hard carry champions. So I'm hoping to see some of that here on Northeastern. I messaged Hiccup a little bit about what the vibes here are at with Northeastern, and she said that generally vibes are good. The team is playing really well and hoping that they're going to have a good season. And so right now, I've got Northeastern at my number 1 in the ESC. We'll go on to number 6 now. We're going to talk about the Midwest Esports Conference, everybody's favorite if you are in the amateur space. This conference is most known for being broadcasted and having LANs hosted by Unified, who is a tournament organizer here in the space. I think the big thing here is that the conference got a lot deeper. There are more good teams that have entered the MEC this season. I really wanted to put them ahead of the next conference, which if you can guess if you've been following for CLOL for a while. However, I think the top of the conference did get a little bit weaker, as we'll discuss in a bit. The really cool thing about the MEC is, despite it being 8 teams, I think that 6 of those 8 teams are going to be competitive, which is why I have power ranked all 6 here. Number 6, I've got Columbia College. This is a new team that to the conference, but a legacy team in CLOL. You might remember the old roster of CC that unfortunately all fell apart due to some disagreements between the players and ownership. I don't know too much about all that, but it was Izo, Colthrow, Rovex, Shogo, and Chookies, which is just an insane CLOL roster. If that team was playing today, they'd certainly be in the top 3, top 4 conversations, top 8 conversations. Definitely don't look as good this split. However, they do still have like a full Diamond Plus roster. Paragon, who was on this team last year, I think has graduated, so he will not be competing with them anymore. However, Columbia College still going to be interesting to watch. As we mentioned earlier on, they were in the ECAC last split. This year, they are now in the MEC. At number 5, I've gotten a team that has been in the MEC since I was covering it back in 2022. That is Drury. They have Quick Slice and Fat Cat returning, as well as a couple of other really solid Diamond Master tier players. Fat Cat, I know, is a big fan of just following the CLOL space as a whole. So if you are watching this, hello. And for the rest of this team, I feel like they've slowly been getting better and better throughout the years. I remember when I first covered them in the MEC, they were like kind of a bottom feeder, and they have been improving over the last few seasons. Now we get into the teams that I think can seriously contend for the top of the table at the MEC. At number 4, we've gotten Ottawa. This team is a big question mark for me. They could jump maybe even up to 2. They could also maybe slide down to 4 or 5, depending on what their roster ends up looking like. The big thing is that we don't really know exactly what their roster is looking like. Their jungler Prod, as well as some of the other players on that team, have been reaching out on socials and been trying to find a top laner, and I don't know if that has happened just yet. They've been recruiting for a long time. If you are a challenger top laner and you want to go play for CLOL, you go hit them up, I guess. But I do know that Prod, Plux, I think Riversided, and Blonde potentially are all still there. But the question is kind of what does the rest of that team look like? Levi and Killian, I believe, are both not at Ottawa anymore. This was a team that made it to the top 32 in CLOL last season. At number 3, I've gotten a new team to the Midwest Esports Conference, and that is the Ohio State University College Football National Champions. We'll see if they could become College Esports National Champions. I don't necessarily think so, but hey, good shout here for OSU. This team flopped out of the top 16 in North last year, unfortunately. However, they do have a very solid roster of Diamond Plus players. They did make it to top 32 in 2023, and they are led by one of the legends in the amateur space, that being named Fivefire. If you've been around as long as I have, or even beyond, Fivefire was one of the best amateur mid laners in this space back in 2020 and 2021. He competed for a team called No Org. slash a new esports, and they ended up winning Proving Grounds, which was the tournament between amateur teams and academy teams. Five Fire, along with some of the other players on that squad, won the entire tournament there. Unfortunately, he never really got a full shot at academy, and so he had since retired, and now he's just playing CLOL at Ohio State. I think the big thing is that I think he's made it pretty clear and on the record that Five Fire, he's not necessarily taking this as seriously as he took pro, which definitely makes sense because CLOL is not as important as playing pro. However, he's still a very good player, and we definitely saw that at times in 2023. Also joining him are players like Cyborg and some other solid Diamond Plus players. They should be competitive, and I think having them in the MEC is actually going to make this very interesting. I think historically the MEC has had like a big three in GVU, PNW, and Ottawa. Now there's at least a fourth, and we'll see if Drury and CC can keep up. But now we get into the top two. And this might be like a controversial one here, but I got Purdue Northwest, the defending champions of the MEC, moving down to number 2 in the conference. Now, Purdue Northwest have a completely new look roster. They consist of Prankuru in the top lane, who is returning. They got Ivan, or I think his name is Tangerine or something like that, in the jungle. Aljun in the mid lane, Udon Bidon at ADC, and Nukes at support. Udon Bidon, I think, was playing for a different PNW team back in 2022 when I was casting it, and he was playing support. And so now he's playing ADC. I think, that switch from him compared to Winking on this PNW roster last year, where they made a top 16 run, is a very, very big change. And so I think that is the biggest indicator of why I think this team will be weaker. Around the other parts of their roster, I don't know too much about this Ivan guy. Aljun is a very good player. However, I really like the combo duo of Doubtful and Klexo last season, and I'm sad that they didn't get a chance to run it back. And Nukes coming in for, who was it? The Poner back in 2024. I think is probably a pretty similar one. Nukes has played on some OQ teams, so has Poner. The big change, of course, is Udon Bidon. I think that bot lane is going to be a bit of a downgrade. And on the other side, I think that Grandview maybe had a bit of a slight upgrade, which is why I'm putting them as the favorites so far to win the MEC. Their roster is mostly the same. They have Castle, Jinkal, Nightstar, and Pluto. They also still have Strict Proctor, who if you might remember, was playing top lane for them last season. However, Strict Proctor is kind of a support main. He was playing support in the OQs. That is, I think, his primary role. He was just playing top, playing a lot of Orin and Cassante, basically because the team didn't really have a top laner. But now they do. It looks like they brought in ShamWow from the University of Michigan and I think ISU back in the day as well. So that is going to be a really fun change. We saw them play in things like the NECC Fall League, and they had pretty good results. So I always thought ShamWow was pretty fun. I really think that Nightstar is one of the best ADCs that we have here. Definitely in the MEC, maybe even just in CLOL as a whole. And then the mid jungle of Castle Jinkal. Very excited to watch them continue to grow. I really like the stuff that we saw from them, both in collegiate and in amateur last season. You might have been able to deduce at this point that we've gotten through a lot of different partner conferences and have not gone through any of the regional conferences yet. Now, that is going to change right now as we unveil our 5th best conference in CLOL. Sorry, guys. It's the West. I know that the West always gets ridiculed, but really, they always seem to disappoint. They, not only do I think that, they always quote-unquote disappoint according to the general perception of people, but I thought last year was actually a pretty strong season for West. They had 5 teams enter the top 32 bracket. 4 of them, of course, being voted in by the committee. So that means the committee thought that these guys were all very good. And they had, and you had a lot of really, really solid players. However, a lot of them are gone this season. Most notably, Soligo on CU Boulder is out. Actually, Colorado Boulder not even making it into the top 32 in terms of seeding. They are downplaying the open division after Soligo have left them. And also in this conversation is USC, as I don't think that Levitate is going to be playing with them anymore. So that also combined with UCSD, which was always a top contender, having graduated a lot of their players. The top of West has definitely gotten weaker. Now, the reason I did not put the MEC above them is that they do have a very high proportion of their teams being high diamond or more. I think 19 out of the 32 teams in this conference finished or have 5 players of diamond or diamond average or better, and the top 16 and top 32 average elos are, I think, second highest at all. So even though they don't really have a ton of competitors and a lot of their stars are gone, this is still a very deep conference, and I imagine this one to actually be one of the more competitive conferences in terms of getting those top 4 spots to lock yourself a chance in the CLOL bracket. So we're going to start with our top 10 list here, and we're going to go at number 10, Cal State Fullerton. Don't have too much to say about them. They finished 6th place in the conference last season. However, the consolation bracket in West ended up having a lot of forfeits. I think CSF was a bit of a benefactor of that, so they land here at 10. Simon Fraser University at number 9. They are a decent team that is always kind of in the mix. They always have like a high diamond average team, but I don't think that they are going to be that good. Actually, I think that they are a master average roster, which is going to be pretty exciting. However, they missed playoffs last season, and I don't know how much we can count on them just in terms of, expectations based off of that result from last year. At number 8, I've gotten a team called Irvine Valley College. This is maybe a bit of a flyer. I don't think many people have them on their radars. I think Irvine Valley was seeded 19th or so, but when I was looking through the rosters in West, I noticed they have a player named Timio. Irvine Valley is seeded 16th in the conference. Their guy Timio is challenger, and he played on Sea Dogs in 2023, which was an OQ team that went 2-3 in Swiss. They also have 2 other master tier players. I'm not sure about the rest of the team. They did also not perform very well in the group stage. Last year, they went 1-6 and failed to make the playoffs. So maybe taking a gamble here with IVC. However, I do think that CLOL is a league where if you have just a really good couple of players and then a bunch of kind of average guys towards the bottom, you should be able to still make some waves. So I have Irvine Valley at 8. Number 7 is UC San Diego. I really don't know what their roster is going to look like. I think Protos and a lot of the gang that was playing with him have all left. It looks like, according to the snapshot, they're going to be running with a completely new roster this year. However, they all are still high elo, and UCSD is a pretty well-known esports club or organization, I should say, in the West. And so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt right now and stick them in at 7. At number 6, we've got UC Santa Clara. They are seeded 18th right now in terms of elo. However, they do have Dunks, who, if you might remember, was a rookie jungler on Jake's Kittens and played on some other OQ teams back in the day. And this was actually a really fun UCSC team to watch last season. They made it to the quarterfinals of West, and then they played against UC Irvine, who was the favorites going into it in terms of conference strength. Got guys like Mike Young and Gorica, and they took them to 5 games. They made UCI sweat. I take a lot of stock in that. I think that Dunks was a really good player back in 2022 when he was playing in OQs. I think that despite them FFing their consolation bracket games, this UCSC team can be very good, and so I have them right here at 6. UCLA and Berkeley, I don't know too much about. However, they do kind of have master tier rosters, and they all should be pretty good because they have master tier rosters. I just don't know too much about the players on their team, and I'm going to give these guys the benefit of the doubt over potentially a Santa Clara or an Irvine Valley, just because they have more kind of, while they do have the master tier players, they also don't have, Diamond or Emerald players kind of on their starting 5 as well. At number 3, we got UC Davis. This team has Yoru, who was a support on Next Level Esports last season. That was a surprise team of the OQ. Made it all the way to top 16. They've got a full master team. However, they also did miss the playoffs last year, which is an interesting thing to note. The Western Conference is going to be very, very competitive, just because there's not necessarily like a ton of top dogs in this conference. I could see all of these teams ranked 3 to 10 finishing either 4-1 in the Swiss stage or missing the playoffs in the Swiss stage by going 2-3 or worse. That is just how balanced and how competitive I think West is going to be. At number 2, I've got Weber State, the defending champions. A lot of people turned heads when they saw Weber State winning and beating UCI, but this team actually was very solid last season. They got a good core of amateur players that have been playing together for the last couple of years, as well as Goku, who is a player that was in Brazil as as recently as I think 4 or 5 years ago. Sendy is their AD carry. I think he's really good. He's still there. I don't know what exactly the rest of their roster does look like. I think Jezorks, or however you pronounce that, he's still on the team. But generally, Weber State, I talked to Crazy Legs, their coach, and things like that in the last couple of months. They're a really well-run program. They have a very specific goal, and that is to win all of CLOL. I don't necessarily know if their roster has what it takes to do that. However, it definitely has the potential, I should say, to win the West Conference. And our number one team in the West, I'm going to have UC Irvine. This team did make a couple of big upgrades after kind of unceremoniously flopping out, as they kind of have historically done over the last couple of years, unfortunately. They have added Strompist and Rosethorn, both to their roster. Rosethorn will be in the jungle, as he played on Golden Guardians and CLG Academy back in the day. And Strompist, who was a mid laner in amateur for many years, and now was relatively recently on SLU in 2023, will be playing top lane for them. And so that is going to be a fun development for UCI. Their roster fully now will be Strompist, Rosethorn, Zhao Danny, Orsina, Gorica, and Cerulean. Now, I think that the big problem that UCI ran into last year was the fact they didn't really have a top laner, and that ended up kind of opening up bad situations for them. Barrick kind of was the historic top laner on this team, and he ended up leaving to go pursue going pro, which much respect to Barrick. I hope he is doing well, and I hope to see him in the OQ this year. But they were not, I think they had Elated as their top laner last year, and he just wasn't really doing enough in a lot of those games to keep UCI in things. Strompist played top lane with SLU for about half of a year when they were still looking for a new top laner, ended up settling on Vital, playing that position. But Strompist does have some top lane experience and is a grinder, so I think that him and UCI are going to hopefully do better than they have in the last couple of seasons. Because I feel like UCI over the last couple of years have been very disappointing. They've been star-studded, having some really good rosters, but just never really breaking into the top echelon of CLOL like we kind of hope they do. And that is why I think a lot of the voters in polls and people just maybe have some fatigue towards trying to support UCI. Like, oh, here comes another UCI roster. Surely they're not going to go and choke in the playoffs again. But we'll see if this roster has anything better. I think just due to the amount of star power on this team, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt and put them number one. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Weber State ends up becoming the West Conference champions at the end of the year. Let's crack into the top four. Number 4, we got the South Conference. This is, of course, the home of UST, who won 2 straight collegiate championships in 2022 and 2023. And I think overall, the top teams in this conference have upgraded. I think last year, a lot of people were saying South is the weakest conference right now. South is the weakest conference because of the fact that they got 4 auto bids because UST won, but it really felt like it was a 1 or 2 team conference with not a ton of other teams really deserving, in quotes, that opportunity to be in the bracket just because another team in their conference, UST, did really good. However, I do think that this is a upgraded South Conference from 2024, specifically towards the middle of the pack here in this top 10. The top 4 to 6 are going to, in my opinion, are going to be very, very competitive, and I can see a world where there is clawing and biting and screaming to get to that top 4 spot, to get that automatic guarantee into the championship bracket. The bottom of the conference is still weak, which means that for the South Conference teams, their first week of Swiss is going to be very easy. However, I think once we get into the later rounds of Swiss, this is where this conference will be very fun to watch. Let's start at the bottom here and talk about some of the teams that I think might have a chance to sneak into the playoffs. With number 10 in Florida. Florida made top 32 last season. I think they unfortunately have a very low chance of doing it again. Not a lot of their players are the same. And I think, as we mentioned, the conference has gotten a lot stronger. NC State at 9 have a new look roster. Their mid lane, named Unraveling, is returning. They have 2 Grandmaster players and a Diamond Average team. They've got Pessoa, who helped me a lot actually with figuring out like kind of where to place all these teams, with giving me some blurbs about all of them. So Pessoa, thank you very much. I have NC State right now at 9th in the South. Virginia Tech at my 8th seed in the South Conference. They're an interesting team because they did not play in CLOL last year. However, you might know them more as Vespa. They were an organization that played and made the top 32 bracket, I think, in 2022. But for whatever reason, they were not allowed by their school, I believe, administration, to play in CLOL last season. The team played in ACL in the last winter split. They went 2-5. They didn't make playoffs. However, I think winning at least some of those games is good enough to consider them a solid enough CLOL team to potentially be towards the top of the conference. I've got both UT teams kind of in the 6-7 mush. UT Austin and UT Dallas were both relatively competitive. You might remember UT Dallas last season actually taking UST to 5 games in the South Conference Finals, led by Deftly, their AD carry, who, of course, has played in the LCS for a couple of years. Unfortunately, I don't think Deftly is returning, and neither are some of the other players on this UT Dallas roster that made them very strong. Because of that, I have them below Austin, who is a Master Plus team. Is there a world where UT Dallas completely surprises me and ends up shocking the world? Sure. However, I think right now, because Deftly's not on the team, I cannot put them higher than 7th. I have UT Austin 6th. Now we get into some fun ones here. I think these top 5s are going to be very good. While UT Austin is a Master Tier roster, South Florida actually is not. I think they have a couple of Diamond players mixed in there. However, you might be wondering right now, if you were looking at just the seeding. Hey, Grapes, South Florida, they're seeded 28th right now in the South, excuse me. Why do you have them ranked 5th in the conference? And that is because they didn't get all their roster in time for the snapshot. And they actually have, I think, the best player in the South Conference that is not named, that is not a part of UST. And his name is Dragoon. That's right. Dragoon Smash is going to be playing on South Florida for the 2025 CLOL season. He actually has been attending the university for the past couple of years, but decided to focus on his amateur obligations over 23 and 24. However, I got to talk to him for a little bit, and he said he wanted a chance to play CLOL, have some more consistency in his schedule, and so thought that this was a good option. And he'll be joining a team that finished 4th place, or 5th place, I should say, I think, in the conference last year. So that is obviously a very good start. The reason I'm not putting them higher, even though they were 5th last year and upgraded, was because I think that some of the other teams might have upgraded a little bit more. Number 4, we got Georgia State. This team lost in the playoffs in round 1 last season. However, they have added 2 new players in their mid-jungle that I think will be pretty good. Or actually, no, just one, but I don't remember exactly. Their mid laner Playmaker was on the Abandoned Kittens roster in the spring split. That was a team that had actually Devin and Phantom Star, as well as Samikin, although Samikin swapped out, and Playmaker came in. He wasn't anything too special, however, he was an OQ level talent. I think that is a very notable thing. I believe he played on Georgia State last season. I could be mistaken. The other player on Georgia State that is joining them for the first time is their jungler Doubtful, who played on PNW last season. He was part of that team that I thought was very, very fun to watch. They won the MEC, and I think Doubtful's a pretty solid jungler. And so having him on this Georgia State roster, combined with the rest of the team, they have Hyperton in the top lane. He is a guy that has been on part of this roster for a couple of years at this point. He's been consistently challenger. I think Georgia State could be pretty solid. I have them ahead of South Florida just because I think they have a little bit more depth to their lineup. In 3rd place, we got the new kids on the block in SCAD. This is kind of the flavor of the month. Super exciting team. They have Izo, Wartrim, Tynox, Skipture, Avril, and Mixture. I think Avril will be able to kind of swap between AD and support, whether they want Skipture or Mixture to be playing. I would assume they want Mixture to be playing a lot of the time, who is a new addition to the team. Actually not playing in any of the tournaments that SCAD participated in over the fall split. However, coming here for the spring semester, and I think being a very, very good player. Mixture, top-level OQ player. We think that he is somebody who is a NACL prospect. He's going to be competing with Respawn this season in the OQ. The question is, who's going to carry on this team? The big carries on this roster, the mid and the ADC, Tynox and Skipshire, are kind of the 2 unknowns on this team in comparison to Izo, Wartrim, and Avril, and Mixture, of course. Izo, of course, is not historically a carry player. Wartrim can be sometimes, although I don't know if he necessarily has the juice, and I don't know how much, the juice in terms of playing carries. I think he's a very good playmaker, but in terms of him being the primary carry, I don't know if that's the situation for him. And Avril, I think she's a very solid marksman player. I just don't know how much they're going to be prioritizing her over some of the other players on this team. So if they can figure out a play style in which they can funnel resources into somebody and have it work successfully, I think the SCAD team will be very good. However, I do have them at third, below Oklahoma Christian University, because of the fact that OC also made some big changes and also have some pedigree as they finished in the top 32 last season. The big names on OC that I want to talk about that are coming in that are new is Batao, the top laner. He was in CBLOL last season, part of the Brazilian team. Kaboom. I got the chance to talk to Hawk, actually, who covered the CBLOL last season, about Batao. He thinks that he is a very good player. I think that him going up against players like Porsche or Dragoon in this will be very, very interesting to see how good a mid-tier but potentially exciting prospect in the CBLOL looks compared to like the tier 2.5, tier 3 talent that we have here in the ecosystem. They still have Emps, they still have a Josu. I think Trinket has left the roster, which would be pretty unfortunate. And they also have a support from Turkey named Kairos. So with some of the new players that are coming in, I think this OC roster is going to be very good. However, they unfortunately do not hold a candle to UST, who of course are going to be the runaway favorite in this conference. They also made some big upgrades. Just one actually, but it was a pretty fun one. They have added Bradley into their mid lane. Bradley, the guy who stomped through all of OQs. Bradley, the guy who was on FlyQuest Challenges last year. Bradley, a very, very solid mid laner in the collegiate landscape. Last time he was in collegiate was as a part of Bethany, and that team made it all the way to top 4. Shout out to you, Colomer, if you are watching. UST, certainly a title contender, not just for the South Conference, but for the CLOL Championship. The question is, how much better does Bradley make them over somebody like Robbie Bob, who always has the juice when it comes to playing in CLOL? Robbie is still going to be a part of the team and might be subbing in for some games, but Bradley will be the player that will be joining Porsche, Kenvi, Array, and Trevor. While I can see a world where 5 teams from the South get in and the committee votes in that 5th seed, I think UST is still the runaway favorite. And because the weakness of the bottom of the conference, I have them here at 4th. Now we have reached our top 3 CLOL conferences in terms of my power rankings, and if you are good at deductive reasoning, you might have tried to figure out who exactly are left. And this could be the hot take of the episode here. At number 3, I've got the North. I know that the Northern Conference has historically been the strongest out of any of the organizations in CLOL, or any of the conferences in CLOL, I should say. However, they have definitely lost a little bit of the sauce. Of course, the pro that they have is they have the best team in the league. It is going to be Maryville. We'll talk about them in a bit. But they did lose a ton of their really strong rosters. You might have kind of noticed at this point teams like Purdue, teams like Oakland, teams like Ohio State are all gone. In fact, 3 of the top 8 teams in last season for them are gone. Another one being Northwood, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Spoiler alert. But have the North here at number 3. This is by far the best in terms of top-heavy teams. I think the benefits of this conference is they have 3 rosters who I think could make top 8, where I don't think I could say the same about nearly any of the other conferences. The downside, of course, is that they have actually the lowest average elo and the least amount of Diamond Plus teams out of any of the conferences in the regional sense. That means that East, South, and West all have a better average elo and more Diamond Plus teams. That is very shocking. That means that I think the Northern Conference regular season will actually be one of the less interesting ones to watch, because I think at the end of the day, everybody knows the teams that are going to be selected and the teams that are going to be placed top 4 because it is so top-heavy. However, we'll give some shout-outs to some of the teams that are here. Again, this is such a weak kind of area that the bottom 3, 8, 9, 10, I really don't know much about. I kind of just pulled based off of average elo. Mizzou, Missouri Baptist, and Case Western. Sorry, guys. I mean, I don't know too much about these organizations in terms of collegiate. Hopefully, they provide some sort of fight. I think each of them kind of were around the Diamond 3, Diamond 2-ish average. However, compared to the top of the conference, not even close. Michigan State, I think, is the first real team in North. They come in at number 7 in my power rankings. They've historically been solid. You might remember that team with RBM. that finished all the way top 8 in CLOL. I think they made it to LA in 2021. Michigan State historically has been a good CLOL team. However, this year, don't really know if that is going to be the case, at least in comparison to some of the top dogs. They have Aquanic, who is a player on Skibidi Luxmaxers, which was a big surprise team actually in the ACL. They also have Muasame, who is a challenger jungler, and is one of the few and this is one of the few teams that has 5 Masters Plus players on their team, which is why I am giving them the 7th seed. UHSP is a new team here. They, I think, competed in the NECC last season, and they will be here at number 6. They played in the NECC finals, I think, in the fall season, which was maybe a bit of a surprise. If I'm not mistaken, they lost to Grandview in that one pretty handily, but I'm not 100% sure. The big name on this team is Sir Zepre, or Sir Zepre. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. Apologies. He was a mid laner on a bunch of different OQ teams, including Maelstrom, which was a roster that upset a bunch of people from a low seed back in 2024. This was the second highest team in terms of average elo, but just don't know if the rest of their players are known enough quantities for us to really consider them to be super solid in terms of championship contenders, as well as the fact that they did very poorly, I believe, in the NECC conference last year. At number 5 in the East, I've gotten Minnesota. They retain a lot of the core that finished 6th. Their conference is weaker now, so with some of the other teams going down, I have Minnesota sliding up. Now we get into the teams that I think have a very good case in terms of making top 4, probably the ones that'll be playing in the CLOL bracket at the end of the year. I got Bethany at number 4. This team has Amazing still, who you might know from TSM, all of the EU teams that he was on. He is now here in America once again, playing collegiate and coaching. They also have Dog2 and Yoon, I believe, still on the roster. They did some really weird lane swap stuff that was actually extremely creative, where they sent Dog2 top lane and basically had him play only 80 carries. Ended up actually working out for them pretty well. So I'm excited to watch this Bethany team, although I don't know how much they have in terms of contention at a title compared to the top 3. This is where it gets weird. We've got the defending champions of CLOL itself, St. Louis University, at number 3. You might be asking, how are they at number 3? Well, if you are not aware, SLU unfortunately disbanded a lot of their esports programs and are no longer running varsity. They're keeping the players that were signed on to them scholarship until the end, but they are not going to be providing any additional support, unfortunately, for them. However, that's a good enough offer for some players to stick around, and so we will be seeing Winnie, Darkwings, and Aaron all back with SLU this season. They'll be playing with Deos, I believe, who's still going to be hanging around there as well. The question, of course, that and the reason that I put SLU here at 3, and why you might see them a little bit lower in the general power rankings as well, is because even though that these are really good players, Winnie, Darkwings, and Aaron, that love playing together, I just don't know how much they're going to be taking this seriously in terms of the collegiate season, as well as the fact that Deos is probably going to be playing off-role somewhere, and they'll have some probably random player in the top lane for them because they can't bring anybody in off of scholarship because the program has, of course, died out. So I've got SLU at 3. I think it's definitely see a world where they find some combo of 5 with Deos and whatever other player that works out for them, and they make a run. It would be fun to see another Maryville SLU rematch, but I'm not 100% sure if that is going to be the case. Now we get to our top 2 of the Northern Conference. Before we get into the number 1, let's talk about ISU here at second. They have been the story of the fall season. They made some really big upgrades. They had a crazy run in the Aegis Championship League. I think they went almost perfect in the regular season. Their roster now consists of PCL, Music, Drew Dozer, Fatican, and Barlow, with Cross and Mesla both as subs. This team is legit. I think they could also make their way into the OQs if they wanted to as well. I think having Music as a big leader for this squad is going to be great for them. PCL as just a solid top laner is going to be fantastic for this team. Drew Dozer and Meslo, I think both of them are probably a little bit more comfortable in the mid lane. There were situations last year where one of them had to play mid, one of them had to play top. I think allowing them to kind of sort it out between themselves in mid and having just a solid guy like PCL up there in the top lane is going to be very, very good. And I really liked what I saw from Fatican last year as well. At the bottom lane, he's coming in from Turkey, and we'll see what he looks like on ISU. Last but not least, of course, is Maryville. I think they are the presumptive #1 team for basically everybody. And why shouldn't they be? They are the NACL winning defending champions. They are the CLO runner-ups because SLU beat them, unfortunately for them. But they are losing a couple of their players, most notably Scary Jerry. Actually, he's the only guy that's I think is leaving. So the rest of their roster is staying the same. Would have really hoped that Yuji was not going to be here. Not because I don't like Yuji at Maryville, but because I would have liked to see Yuji on an LTA team. But they will have, I think now a 7-man roster with 3 new players coming in. They got Zamudo, Yuji, Spyrax, Sajed from FlyQuest, and Zyko, and they also have Toasty Alex and Shimmer. I'm actually very interested to see if if Toasty can get some playing time. I don't think that he was better than Spyrax in the NACL season last year. I think that he has a lot of untapped potential and could learn a lot in this environment. Could potentially get some spots, especially in a very weak early regular season in the Northern Conference. And then potentially, like, as the season winds down, very curious to see, like, oh, does Toasty sub in for these matchups? Does Spyrax come in for these matchups? I think that is the big one. I would really not expect Yuji to be subbed out for Shimmer for whatever reason, although I do think that Shimmer is a very good player and could be a very fun face of Maryville after Yuji eventually, hopefully, gets signed somewhere. But yeah, right now Maryville, they're the runaway favorites, I think, and that's why we have them at the top of North. And so, who is a team that displaced the Northern? Who is the conference, I should say, that displaced the North? It's gonna go to the East, actually, who come in at the second best conference in CLOL. You can maybe guess who's not #1. We'll talk about them in a bit. So, why did I power rank East ahead of North? The big reason is that the Eastern Conference just is so deep. They have the best average ELO out of any of the conferences. They have the most Diamond Plus teams out of any of the conferences, and they have Tier 3 plus level players on so many of the teams. Each of the rosters that we're going to be talking about here in the top 10 have a player that has competed either at the top level of OQs or in Academy/NACL. The downside of East is that they do not have a true championship level contender, while I would argue that teams like the conferences like the North, the South, or even the other conference that has not been named just yet definitely do. But I think that means we will have ourselves an absolute bloodbath at our hands for the Eastern Conference. Not just for the top seed, but also for who gets 4th and 5th, because those are the big important seeds in terms of clinching spots into the championship bracket. So let's get into our top 10 here in East. I know we've been going on for a while. I hope you've been enjoying. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoy this type of content. At number 10, we've got Stony Brook University. This is actually the old team of Darkwings. They're over around the New York City area. Unfortunately, Darkwing's not playing with them because he's with SLU now. However, they do have Keetong, who is a support that has been kind of the super sub in NACL. I feel like whenever an NACL team needs a sub in the support position, Keetong always is there and ready to go. He's a very good player. Rest of his team's about Diamond average. But I just wanted to give him a shout out, and I think Stony Brook compared to the rest of the other teams around here in this range, maybe just having that star player could give them the edge. At number 9, I've gotten Drexel. They have Inori B, who is, of course, a very solid player in NACLQ. He's signed to Chimek, which is an OQ roster that'll be playing. He's going to be alongside Kim Down on that one. Drexel was an interesting team. I don't think they made the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. However, it's going to be Inori B, a couple of other master players, and maybe the rest of the team being Diamond. So this team has improved from last year in terms of just average ELO. However, I don't think they're necessarily in the running to contend for the top. However, I could see a world where they find some sort of miracle run and maybe slide their way into the top 4. Same with Temple, another roster that was kind of in the top 8 last year. They finished 7th in 2024. They have Forsen or Psycho. I think he played top lane last year for them. However, he is most known as an AD carry. He was the ADC for Lotus in the spring split that kind of really took the world by storm. He was like one of the better ADCs that we had in the split that year. In the league that split, I should say. They've got 2 other collegiate veterans. Kosha is going to be Forson's bottom lane partner in the support position, and he's a really high elo player. And they also have Hansha, who was on Arizona State University in years past. So I think that is a bit of an upgrade for them. I think Temple has a good chance to potentially make some waves here in the East. At 7, we've got Boston University. I know I hate to do this to my boy Samikin, but he and his friends are going to be at 4. While they did make it into top 32 and have a bit of a run in the lower bracket, played some bangers to get their way into that spot. Unfortunately, I do think that Samikin has said that his collegiate teammates, he has struggled to find a fully functioning full roster for this year. And so while there was potentially some excitement about getting some new players in, just not going to be a full, complete roster early on in the season, at the very least, for BU. And I know that that is always a big deal because, especially now that it is Swiss in the regular season, every regular season matchup is going to be important, especially in a conference as competitive as East. So right now I have Samikin and BU at 7. However, if the rest of the team around him starts to look pretty good, I mean, it seemed like Samikin was kind of dragging along 4 corpses at some point of the 2024 Eastern Conference playoffs, so could see him doing it again. But right now I think that some other teams are potentially better. Like Waterloo, who I have here at 6. They have Inexhaustive returning. Onat is listed on their roster, although I believe he announced that he was going to just be coaching. I wonder if he will play just because he definitely would be like the best player on the team if he wanted to play. I think they did graduate a good portion of their players, though, and so am interested to see how well they do in the long run. Now we get into the teams that I'm actually personally really excited about. At 5, I should say, have McMaster University. They have Hoarder, who has been a really hyped up prospect in the top lane for the last couple of splits. He's playing on that team with Aaron and Minwee in the OQs, which Tempest Gaming, which should be a really fun team to watch. Hoarder on McMaster, I feel like we haven't necessarily seen too much of him. They missed playoffs last season. However, this year, I think they've gotten even better. They have about a master average team. They have, I believe, a guy named Lunar who plays ADC listed on their roster. If that is not the Lunar that I know, maybe McMaster falls a little bit. But if it is, this is a very scary roster that I think could potentially, make it all the way up to the top 2 or 3 in the Eastern Conference. At 4, I keep skipping a number. Number 4 in the East is University of Toronto. This is a interesting team. They had a bit of a down year last year. They kind of fizzled out in the top 8 of East, but they should be back this year with a vengeance. They have 5 players that are GM plus, which is, I think, a very rare accomplishment for anybody. I think even like teams like ISU didn't necessarily have that in terms of their snapshots. So 5 players on Toronto who are very good at solo queue. They have players like Little Frosty and Blue 612 that are coming back to the team that finished in the top 16 in CLOL back in 2023. Toronto, I think, should still be a very solid team. They are not as star-studded as the top 3, which is why I have them below them at 4th. UT Mississauga. I think I pronounced that right. This one is a fun one at number 3. Maybe this is a little bit high for UTM, man, but I am getting a little bit of hype for this team. They have AB, who was on the team last season. They have Munchie, who is joining them, I think, for the first time. And they also have Sora, who was a mid laner on some of the OQ teams in the past. I believe he finished top 16 on a roster or 2. Also on this team is Aito, who is a bot laner now. He was a high-level GM player who was in some of the OQs, was on UTM. I think bounced up and down their JV and varsity team last year, but now it has entered a starting spot. And then I think like a diamond-level top laner. But just having a Munchie, I think, is just such a big player on a team like this and in a conference like this, and just in collegiate in general. Hopefully Sora will be able to provide some juice as well. I think UTM is going to be a really fun team to watch. I have them in my power rankings for the top 25. Spoiler alert, and I didn't do so necessarily in the past. Now we get to the top 2. Now, these are the teams that always are kind of at the top of the Eastern Conference, or at least definitely were last season in terms of conversations. I have Western right now at 2 and St. Clair at 1. However, I do think that these two are closer than maybe some other people think. Western certainly going to be a big threat. I think the big news with Western is that they were absorbed by their varsity esports program. For years, Western League of Legends was actually playing as a club team independently from their esports varsity team. However, now it looks like the rosters or the organization will hopefully get a little bit more support. And they basically have the same core that will be rolling things out again. Most notably, Dr. Calculus in the top lane, who had his breakout split as a top laner of Ducky Getters last season. Krakenon as a very solid jungler, who's always kind of in the mix in the OQs. Lynx, who I think is one of the best ADCs that we have in Collegiate. Always either the best ADC in NACLQ or a middle of the pack NACL AD. This guy, I think, has the potential to even be better than that. He's just such a solid player in the bot lane. And joining them this year are going to be Luminosity, who is a support player, and Lovesick Candy, who is a Challenger Hui main, going to be playing mid lane for them this year. So I think a lot of things to be excited about with this Western team. They do lose like Loyal, or Mira, I should say, and Loyal. So that could be... we thought that, those guys were really good for Western last year. However, we didn't know too much about them going into the year, just like we don't know too much about Lovesick Candy or Luminosity. So I'm going to give Western the benefit of the doubt, and I think that the core of players that they have is just so strong, and I think that Western can make it to the finals once again and potentially contend for the top spot in East. However, right now I have St. Clair Esports as the #1 team in the Eastern Conference. Now, I had maybe a bit of a hot take on Salty Runback last week where I said to Hawk that I think actually St. Clair might have downgraded a little bit and that this matchup between St. Clair and Western will be very competitive. They lose Rockboom, who was definitely their star player last year, as well as Bakery Boy, who is just a very fundamental, sound mid laner. They replaced him with Flocon, who I think is a little bit more of a flashy player, probably a bit of an upgrade in the mid lane, but not sure by how much. And then they have Lig in the bottom lane coming in to replace Rockboom. He was a ADC that played in the LLA for a couple of years, now is on St. Clair. I don't know how good this guy is. However, I do know that Rockboom is very good, and I have my doubts about how a new player can do coming in. That is why I'm a little bit more hesitant about the St. Clair roster than others. However, I still think that they are very solidly a top 8 team in CLOL. They definitely can even potentially climb higher than that if everything ends up clicking. They still have their core of Ricky Lafleur, Maddie, Buschetti, and Miracle in the support position, splitting things up. They also have Sama, who is a part of, I think, like Nameless in 2023 or 4. He's a top laner that will be playing probably alongside Ricky. I don't know what exactly their plans are there. But overall, just so many good teams here in East. I'm super excited to watch them play. And now you might have noticed we've gone through all of our regional conferences, yet we are still at #2. And that is because the best conference in CLOL is a partner conference. Yes, once again, it's the NECC. Not only does this team have 4 teams that did very well last season, they also have upgraded and brought in even more. They have brought in Northwood College, Northwood University. Top 4 in CLOL last season, man. This team went on the miracle run. They have now changed their roster a little bit, but most notably have moved from the North into the NECC. So not only do they have Fisher, Winthrop, and Ole Miss, they now also have Northwood. This is going to be a very, very competitive top of the conference. I think up to 4 of these teams could contend for a CLOL title. And the rest of the conference is pretty damn deep as well. There are 12 total teams in the NECC. We are going to rank 8 of them. That goes to show just how strong this conference is. The downside, unfortunately, is because this is not a regional conference. They don't play Swiss. And because they do seeding based off of average ELO, Group A actually ends up being very, very strong. Ole Miss, Winthrop, and Fisher are all in Group A, while Northwood is kind of just on its own in Group B. That means that Northwood is going to have a pretty easy run to the top of the conference, however, or top of the group, and potentially into the playoffs. However, it does mean that potentially will be more difficult for Northwood to get brownie points in terms of, oh, how good is your roster really if you only beat like the 9th best team in the whole region, right? So that'll be an interesting conversation moving forward. Let's get into the top rankings here. Indiana at 8, full Diamond Master team. They finished 8th last season. No surprise that they will be pretty good once again. We have Maryville at 7th. This is a team that has slowly been building a program. I think Destiny Seal, who's an analyst on Team Ambition in 2023, is a part of that program. They got a full Masters roster. They finished not too good in the East Conference last year, but I think they'll have a good chance here to at least pick up a couple of wins in the NECC, although it is still absolutely stacked. Number 6, I have UIUC or Illinois. Now this team caught the short end of the stick last season. They were the last team out. No, they were the first team out of the top 32. The committee voted for Colorado just barely over UIUC, who finished 4th in the NECC last season. Unfortunately, I think they are probably running much of their roster back. And another addition to the conference is Michigan, who was kind of, I think, around, I think they were in the North back in 2022. They had that really fun CLOL run where they had a big win. I got to cast their series, that series that they played against, I think it was actually U of T, which is a pretty fun comparison right there. Um, Michigan, they have a lot of junglers that are really good. They have a Pathing, they have Duan, they have Joseph. They have the rest of their team kind of at like a Diamond Master average as well. I think that whoever's in the jungle position is going to be very good, regardless of what they put in, and that could be the difference maker for this Michigan team. Now we get to Fisher, and Fisher is a very confusing one to me. I actually built these slides before we really learned exactly what Fisher's roster was. Um, I'm going back to take a look at what exactly it is because they are running a lot of new players from what you might have remembered from Fisher last season. Fisher last year had players like Keel, Bob Jenkins on the team, Rallick, Dragonman Kim, but right now they are running a little bit of a different team. Their full starting roster looks like is going to be Bajani in the top lane, Brunes, who is another player I think who played in the ERLs last season. He is a Polish jungler. They have Wayna in the mid lane, who is a Turkish mid laner. They have Brabo or Viscera. Viscera, you might remember him from Mirage Alliance back in the day. And they have Magina, who is a Turkish challenger support. So basically, what really is weird about this Fisher team is they have just basically imported a bunch of European players to play on their roster. Now, this is definitely fine for CLOL. I wonder what it will look like for OQs and if that'll be a problem for them moving forward. But you could take a look at, I don't know, man. Fisher, always a bit of a weird team. While I do not doubt that these ERL players are pretty good, I've not watched any tape of them. That's why I have them at the bottom of this like kind of top pack here. At number 3, we've got Northwood, the new dogs here. They get the unfortunate third place in this conference. Cozy, Will, Reppy, Enthralled, and Clyde is their roster. Reppy, Enthralled, and Clyde all running it back from last season. However, Izo is gone and RBM is gone, and I think that's the big difference here for this team. In all of the big matches that Northwood played, RBM was a determining factor. He was the one who was just absolutely piss smurfing. Whenever RBM is in CLOL, somehow he becomes Prime Canyon, man. And while I do think Will is a very good player, we'll see if he's able to replicate some of that RBM magic, because I think that it could be potentially more exclusive to him. This team definitely could go on a top 4 run if all the pieces click. I think Cozy's also a pretty solid player, and I think potentially an upgrade over Izo up there in the top lane. And I do definitely think that Reppy and Enthralled are some very good carry players. However, just not enough in terms of rosters compared to these top 2. Winthrop at number 2. By the thinnest of margins, I would say. They're also going to be playing in the NACL. I imagine their roster is basically a full run back. Denethor, Trickster, Sword, Mobility, and Chookies. I've heard rumblings that there maybe is a new support coming in. However, I don't want to speak too much on that as they have not announced the roster just yet. But that is probably something to keep an eye out for. There could be a new support at Winthrop this season. This team, I think, kind of disappointed in 2024, all things considered. They played in the OQs, and they failed to make the promotion tournament again after they had such a good run in the fall, winning Hugh, winning 66. They made it to the finals of the first OQ in the spring split, and then unfortunately just did not have enough to make it. I do think, though, they still have really, really talented players top to bottom, specifically Denethor and Mobility. I'm really, really excited to see what they have in store for us there. I want to see another big leap from Mobility. If he can take another big leap, he could actually just be in the LTA next season if a team decides to take a chance on him. I think Denethor also just a really, really solid prospect. But while I do think Winthrop is a very good team, I think that Ole Miss is just a little bit better, and that is why I have them at the best team in the NECC, the best team in the best conference. They made some pretty big changes in their mid-jungle. They added Keel, and they added Shochi. Now, I love Icelandic Hero, and I love Your Uncle Sam. However, when you're replacing them potentially with 2 NACL level players that could potentially be top level players in CLOL. This is a team of 5 that could all be top 3, top 4 in their respective roles in college esports this year. I think that Icelandic is still going to be playing some games, especially at the start of the year, as well as Asila in the mid lane, who also has come in. He'll probably be playing some games in the mid lane as well. I've heard very good things about him. So Ole Miss will be a really fun team for me to watch. This just goes to show, I think, that if you are a high-level esports program run by some good people, shout out to Warhood and shout out to Colomer, as well as having the name recognition of a top-level esports, top-level just university where you can get a really solid education, you are going to be able to attract big names. That is obviously what we are seeing here out of Ole Miss. So that's going to do it for our conference power rankings. We did a little tier list here that I'm going to be sharing with our Twitter page and things like that. This is kind of where I tier the teams. I think there's this big chunk right here in the middle with Southwest, ESC, and MEC. And then after that, it's kind of tiered into 2. NECC, I think, kind of just in a tier of its own. So, a couple more things to do before we wrap up the episode. I know this is a bit of a long one. I'm generally going to be shooting for about an hour on these CLOL Office Hours, but because this is the big introductory episode and we went through over 100 teams here in this podcast, I hope you definitely enjoyed. However, more likely around an hour for these episodes moving forward. The last 2 things that we're going to be doing here is going through the CLOLHub rankings as well as previewing some of the top matchups for the first week of gameplay. Let's start with CLOLHub. I'm a part of the committee again as I was last season, and we released our first preseason top 25 for 2024. No surprise, Maryville at the top. They were unanimously picked as number 1. And then I put my ballot on the right-hand side. I put the CLOLHub ballot on the left-hand side. So we'll be able to kind of compare the 2. In terms of big differences here, the first change that I had between the general consensus of the committee is I had UST and Ole Miss swapped. I had St. Thomas at 2. I had Ole Miss at 3. The reason I did this was because Bradley, I think, is immediately going to be coming in and playing for UST, while Ole Miss, I think they have some struggles or they have some concerns about like how often and how quickly can they get their full roster out, just because people are moving in, people are getting reacquainted to joining universities for the first time, which by all means I think should be something that these programs should be implementing. However, because of that and because this power ranking is kind of just based off of in the moment, I have St. Thomas ahead by just a little bit. I could very easily see that being changed moving forward. Top 6, I think, top 7 or top 6 or 7, I think is very consistent though. I think that these are the 7 teams that we are all expecting to kind of be in the top 8 and potentially contend for a title. That being Maryville, UST, Ole Miss, Winthrop, ISU, Northwood, and St. Clair. Obviously, I think Maryville, St. Thomas, and Ole Miss, maybe Winthrop in here as well. These top 3 or 4 have the best chance of winning a title. Although I would say ISU, Northwood, and St. Clair could potentially reach there at their absolute ceiling. I had SLU a little bit higher than the committee generally did. I think there were a couple of voters that had SLU very low, and that's what brought the vote down. I think the median was probably around 8 or 9, which is where I have them. I have Western a little bit lower, which I actually found surprising because I think a lot of people generally were, specifically Hawk, was also saying that he thought that Western was, a lot weaker than St. Clair, but I actually have them further apart in my power rankings than the CLOLHub. I definitely think that this matchup is going to be very close. I just decided to stick these 2 teams between them. Other big changes that I had from the committee, I had UTM a lot higher than them. They were 19. I had them at 16. I had Toronto a little bit higher. I think I'm just an East truther because I had McMaster higher as well. Maybe the East is all weak, but I think just having these like OQ level players on these teams is enough for me to consider them being really solid. On that note, I had USF a little bit lower, so that is, just kind of how the cookie crumbles, I guess. The last couple of things that I'm going to talk about here is that I had Georgia State and UC Davis as teams in the ballot that the committee did not have in their top 25. The CLOLHub had UHSP and Ottawa in their top 25, and I did not have them on my ballot. Again, I have concerns about Ottawa in terms of their just finding a full completed roster. And then for UHSP, just the previous iterations of this roster's success, as well as just not knowing too many of their names. That is why I put them at outside my ballot, although they probably were relatively close to making it on. Okay. Before we go, let's go through the best matchups to watch in week 1. Now, you might be thinking, Graves, because it's the regular season, because it's Swiss, we might not get very exciting matchups in the first week. However, I have a different perspective here for you because we have 4 matchups between top 25 teams according to the CLOL committee here in this week, or three matchups between top 25 teams, I should say, as well as 2 other ones that I think should be rather exciting. The best matchup of the week will be Ole Miss versus Winthrop. Yes, they somehow are going to be playing each other first in the group stage. What a way to kick off the NECC season. This will be streamed on the NECC Twitch channel. I think Yanni and Shibi are going to be casting that one, so make sure to check that one out this Saturday. Number 3 versus number 4. This is going to tell us a little bit about what to expect from each of these teams. However, I will say take these results kind of with a grain of salt, just because it is the start of the year and a lot can change as we go forward throughout the season, and maybe as teams continue to play, teams continue to improve. I probably have Ole Miss favorite just because I rank them a little bit higher. However, I could definitely see a world where, because Winthrop has been playing together as 5 for a little bit longer, that they could end up having the better squad for this specific moment here in week 1. We'll move on to the South Conference, where the featured matchup that I have here is OC against USF. That, again, is the Dragoon team, University of South Florida, against OC. Seeing Batal, a CBLOL level top laner, against Dragoon instantly will be very fun. I don't know if this is being streamed. Again, the reason this is happening is because USF did not get Dragoon on the roster before the snapshot ended up happening, so they are seeded 28th in their conference. They're going to have a very hard road to get into the playoffs, although I do think that they can do it. Just might be a little bit more stressful than it could have been for them. Next, in the MEC, we got 2 matchups that I'm excited to watch. Grandview against Purdue Northwest is the first one. This is a rematch of the finals, of course. Grandview, of course, falling to Purdue Northwest in that one. However, I do think that GVU made a slight upgrade to their roster with ShamWow. PNW, I think, overall could be a slight downgrade. Could be maybe a side grade. We'll see. And also in the MEC this week, we have Ottawa against Ohio State. This is old guard versus new guard coming in. This will be our first chance at seeing what this new look Ottawa team does look like. Against an OSU squad, just getting to see Fire play is always a treat. And finally, in the West, UC Santa Cruz, the Banana Slugs, against USC, and I think in what I think is about a 15 versus 18 matchup in the West Swiss round 1. Now, we had Santa Cruz pretty high up in our power rankings in that top 10. I think it was like number 6 or 7 or so. They have Dunks, of course. They took UCI to 5 games. And we're going to get a look at USC for the first time. Now, remember, they're not going to be playing with Levitate, and I think a lot of their players are actually not on this roster, the same team that made it to the top 32 last season. So, this will be the test. Will Santa Cruz be able to take them down? If so, I think that my rankings generally are in a good spot. If USC ends up winning this one, and especially if they end up winning this one rather handedly, maybe I just cooked a little bit too much in trying to dumpster dive towards the bottom. Dumpster dive in terms of looking towards the bottom of the seeding and trying to find teams with players that I liked. So this will be the matchup to watch in West. The rest of the conferences don't have anything super exciting going on, although that definitely will change moving forward. So that is going to do it for this first episode of CLOL Office Hours. Once again, thank you very much for everybody who is watching here on the YouTube. From now on, every Friday, this show will be released on our Patreon page. Must be a Tier 1 member in the Extra Salt tier. That is $5 a month. You'll get access to this show, plus, of course, another show called Semi-Pro POV. And in addition to that, access to our Discord, custom badges, shoutouts, and a couple of other perks as well. Patreon.com/SaltyRunbackNA. Link will be down there in description. It'll get you there as well. Hope you enjoyed. Let us know in the comments if I said anything wrong or something wrong about your team. I'll be happy to correct it in the future. And I'm super excited to be covering this collegiate season all year long. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next week on CLOL Office Hours.